All right, we are ready to go. Welcome to the discussion session of Tuesday, May 23rd. We will start with a review of this evening's agenda. Manager McGill, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Tonight we have the introduction of an ordinance amending the charter regarding commission vacancies. The proposed ordinance would result in commission vacancies being filled on the normal two-year elections. We also have a request for final approval amendment for the site plan for the public work facility at 1250 Lindendale Drive to add a fire training facility and the installation of a previously approved public works storage building. We have the consideration of the execution of a development agreement for retaining wall and grading at 256 Connecting Road. We also have the consideration of the execution of a stormwater management agreement for post-construction stormwater management at 6264 Cedar Boulevard. We have the consideration of commencement of pension benefits for deferred participants, and also the consideration of an award for Mount Lebanon's 2023-2024 insurance program.
Great, thank you. Next on the agenda, Alcoasand trunk transfer resolution. I think Dennis, you're here for a double feature. Why don't you start with the first one, please?
Thank you, Commissioner. So I did put both into one PowerPoint even for you, so we can work through the regionalization and go right into grow. Any questions that you do have, as Commissioner Flynn pointed out, it does feel a little bit like Groundhog's Day. We've talked about some of these programs in the past, and just on another year and another iteration of it. With that, so again, the goal. We'll go through the regionalization, some of the background, kind of where that came from, just as a quick to bring everybody back up to speed as to what it all is and what it means. What has been done since the initial inception of it by Alcoasand, current status where Mount Lebanon stands in the process, as well as kind of the region in general. And then lastly, we'll discuss what those next steps are. If the commission decides to proceed with transferring the sewers to Alcoasand. And then following that, we'll give an update on the GROW, which that's the green revitalization of our waterways grant through Alcoasand, and the two projects that we anticipate applying for this year.
Just so you know, Dennis, your version that you're working from looks to be slightly different than the version that was sent over for the packets.
Okay.
It doesn't have the grows in here, but it's sort of further back in the packet itself. So
I'll make sure I send over the most up to date
just
PDF as well.
everything's here. It's just
Flip a little bit.
Yeah, formatted a little different.
Again, just the background regarding regionalization. This was something that was included with Alcoasand's consent order, as well as the regional consent orders. And with Alcoasand's most recent consent order, they are required to make that good faith effort of transferring those lines and having the municipality transfer those trunk lines over to Alcoasand, ownership from the municipalities to Alcoasand. And that is typically, they just stated as 10-inch diameter and greater was the minimum requirement. And then having more than one tributary municipality, I think they left it at the very least two homes from another municipality needed to connect in order for it to be considered for regionalization. With that, Alcoasand identified sewers in 7 different point of connections within Mount Lebanon that met this criteria. They stated that is one of the second most complicated system after PWSA. PWSA obviously has a number of point of connections to be transferred. It's just because Mount Lebanon does have so many interconnections and flows into so many different municipalities. Above here, and hopefully in your packet, is the overall map showing the extents of the sewers which are intended to be transferred. For the most part, they are along the limits or the borders naturally. Those are where the multi-municipal sewers are. In some cases, they are as large as 18-inch or 24 inches in diameter even. And oftentimes are some of the more problematic ones. They're deeper, they're under some major roadways in some cases as well. So as part of the process in 2018, Alcosan performed televising of all those lines that were proposed to be transferred. And at that time, they identified a number of action items to be considered for repair or to be looked at further based on their CCTV contract. And that was in addition to what Mount Lebanon has done typically as part of their consent order and their operation and maintenance plan. And they looked for some different things than what we may have looked for in the past. Of those kind of 43 action items, there were some that we were taking care of as part of the operation and maintenance. There were others that we identified as potentially looking at differently or considering a different repair for. And at that time, it wasn't kind of understood whether or not the municipality, not just Mount Lebanon, but other municipalities would consider the regionalization. So we held off on some of those repairs or remediations. And not only that, with most of these sewers being municipal in nature, a number of these repairs or defects considered multi-municipal sewers or in areas, remote areas where it was difficult to get to. Throughout the time, Alcosan had indicated different potential repair contracts, which we evaluated versus our own contracts within Mount Lebanon, but never deemed that those contracts would be any more cost effective than Mount Lebanon's. And then ultimately in 2021, when it did seem like both Mount Lebanon and the region were moving in that direction for regionalization, we did evaluate some of those repairs and some of those more difficult repairs and have taken care of a significant more. As you can see here, this is a map showing just the location of some of those repairs. Again, similar map is what we just looked at with the extents, and you even see some that are just outside of the municipality, but are considered to be Mount Lebanon's or a share of Mount Lebanon's. So going over kind of what has been done in the time being, after those repairs were identified, for the most part, it was evaluated how they could be incorporated within the contracts that Mount Lebanon already had for their operation and maintenance repairs. Those were developed and prepared, provided to the contractor. As you can see here, there's a breakdown with a number of structural repairs. Those are just the excavation repairs, number of spot liners or smaller liners within the system. There were some where they were just requiring just to be cleaned and retelevised just so that they had that data updated. Some were incorporated within the root treatment contract. The manhole to manhole lining or cured in place lining contract, which Mount Lebanon has done a great job of manhole to manhole lining a significant portion of the system anyway. So it was identified that was a good potential repair to consider. And then lastly, the external point repairs, and those are oftentimes even just repairs of structures. Some of those actually remediated multiple defects that were considered. With that, mapping for each repair, cost estimates were developed for each one. And as repairs were made, then there was a process in resubmitting to Alcosan for consideration to have those removed from the list. As we're stating here, the data submissions were coordinated with Alcosan. Of those initial 43, the majority of them have been repaired and approved by Alcosan. As I stated, they are on active contracts, some of which, as I stated, Mount Lebanon has done quite a bit. So there was a lot on those contracts. So there's some of those contracts that have extended over multiple years as well. And then there were some outstanding defects that were found just due to extenuating circumstances. As I stated earlier, in one situation we had that were in very remote areas, access to them was very difficult and the depth of the repair was extremely difficult. So that was one instance. Another instance was the additional water coming into the line, ones that run right along streams. And so there was just some additional complexity to some of these repairs. Like currently, there are approximately 14 defects or items that have been called out that are still outstanding as part of the contract. With that, Alcosan, as they've been pushing to get this accomplished a little bit more quickly, they did include a post-closing repair and reimbursement agreement, or the PCRA, which is a bit of a mouthful. But it's just another way to kind of proceed with this, as opposed to a number of municipalities have run into the same situation where the repairs are either very difficult to get to or very difficult to repair. So they wanted to find a way to go about it so that the agreements could be made before these repairs were completed. In this case, and it sounded almost too good to be true as we've worked back and forth with Alcosan on it, they stated that all we had to do was develop a cost estimate for each one of these outstanding repairs, provide that to them with backup information as to where that estimate came from. And with that, it would just be a part of your final agreement that you would sign that would include those repairs. And ultimately, then Mount Lebanon would just write a check for whatever that amount was, as opposed to chasing some of these repairs. As I've stated, one thing that we've looked at, there's some repairs where you may make a repair 5 feet into a line and then find that there's another repair 15 feet into the line, which would create another repair and another cost. From what Alcosan has stated, that once you sign that agreement, there would not be any chasing of that repair. Once you send them the check and they've agreed on those final estimates, that would be it. They're not going to come back and say, yeah, they're not saying we have another repair, we found another thing, or this is more complicated than expected. Part of the idea is that they may not necessarily go out and make these repairs themselves even. In some cases, they may be looking to upsize these lines altogether. So to make a repair on the line seems kind of needless in that case. So that's kind of why it's almost like I've mentioned it as like a seller's agreement when you're buying a house, where you give that additional money at the time of closing, and then person doesn't necessarily have to go and make those repairs that were identified. But ultimately, it's just a way to come to a conclusion and an agreement on the contract. So with that, the 4 active contracts we've used in order to identify those cost estimates.
I'm sorry, just to make sure I can. So we could write a check to Alcosan, and in theory, they could say, no, we're not gonna fix that.
Right.
We read the check. They've said this would cost to fix it. Yeah, thanks. Left pocket, that's where the money goes.
Which, or, the other option that we were kind of led to believe prior to them incorporating that, was just we had to go and chase that repair. So for instance, there's one defect that's under McNeely. There's a defect 10 feet in from one manhole and another 10 feet in from another manhole. It's expected that there's probably going to be other defects in between. It's about a 400-foot long line. Altogether, that could be potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars of repair, versus if we just repair the 2 that they've identified, or just provide a cost estimate for the 2 that were identified. It's more like a $10,000 to $15,000 cost in that case. So those are kind of the 2 options that we have if you were to move forward, is either make the repairs and kind of chase those, or to write the check and do it as part of the post-closing agreement. There's also some others where, like I said, some are just listed as to clean and retelephonize. And I believe we have one that's out in front of Giant Eagle on Cochrane And as we've tried to work with the contractor to do just that, we found that debris in there is so built up that they can't just clean it as they normally would. Most likely would repair an excavation and some other significant repairs. And again, a costly repair at that potentially. So that's that option if we were to chase it. But as far as Alcosan goes with this agreement, we would only need to pay that cost of the CCTV. And so that again is kind of some of that give and take. And I think, you know, in that case, almost seemed too good to be true in that they weren't going to come back and, you know, once they found that it was more complicated, ask for something else. But all along, I believe that this is just their way of trying to find a way to push this forward and get it done sooner rather than later. And that's where on this sheet that we're on here, a couple of the televising contract, we identified the handful of segments that required that to only cost about $135, as opposed to an excavation repair that could be $5,000 or $10,000. And the chemical root treatment for one, so it roots only about $500, as opposed to manhole lining that could be a few $1,000s. So with that, we identified we approximated it at about $200,000 would be the cost of those. Once we kind of reviewed with Alcosan, and they actually eliminated some of those because we had provided some updated CCTV. The cost came down to approximately $120,000. And even since this was produced, I was trying not to change it too much from when I had sent it along. It appears that number may have come down even further. So we've had some discussions with Alcosan to work towards that. And they won't make any final kind of approval or recommendations until the resolution has been passed. And that leads us into kind of the next steps of the process. So I've focused, you know, this discussion on kind of what we've been doing for those repairs. And that's one of the main items that has been considered along the way. But there are a series of agreements. So like I stated, there were 7 point of connections. So there are seven separate agreements that would need to be made. And with that, I'll get into some of the details as to what goes into those agreements and what's required to start that process. And the first of which is to execute a resolution. They initially wanted 7 separate resolutions, and Keith had kind of coordinated with them, and they said that we could combine those all into one. And that would be expected for consideration in June, right, Keith?
That's the current.
Yeah. And with that, once they receive that resolution, then that process would start where they would start evaluating the permits, because they have to do a permit transfer if you were to go that route. They would start evaluating the easement. So there's an easement coordination that would be in there as well. And I know.
I'm sorry, and so when it comes time for a commission to vote, you'd mentioned there's verbal, is there some number, you know, we're voting on these 7 resolutions into one, max exposure to Mount Lebanon is X?
Within the resolution, there's nothing that would tie you to that number, one way or another. The resolution, as they stated, I think I have it here.
I guess what I'm looking for is where is the, you know, before we vote, we should have an idea of the capped cost number.
Yeah, and I do understand that. That was one thing that I did talk to Alcosan about. In what they've said all along, that resolution is just indicating the municipalities, and I actually took this directly from the resolution and from one of the recent presentations that Alcosan gave on the regionalization. It is just a desire to transfer the assets. It doesn't lock you into required to transfer any assets or transferring any sewers over. It doesn't lock you into any cost or anything related to those defects or those repairs. So it is more of an administrative step demonstrating that municipalities' good faith intent to participate in the transfer. And until then, they wouldn't have that final agreement, but at any time then, if municipality did not agree with the costs that were discussed as part of that post-closing repair agreement, then there could be further discussion at that time, or it wouldn't walk you into.
Not to interrupt you, Danny, but maybe you know, or I'm gonna ask Bill. This is sort of the first step that indicates the interest in transferring. There will be transfer agreements for these points of connection, which the solicitor will review, will look at cost estimates before we actually execute. So by issuing the resolutions, all we're saying is, yes, we're interested. Go ahead to the next step and prepare these transfer agreements, work through with DEP what you need to work through with DEP, and it still has to come back to us for the final official sign.
Thank you.
See, Steve, the other thing seems, if there's defects of a certain magnitude in Alcoasand and Saline, they have to fix them. I mean, they're gonna have they have their own consent order with DEP. This isn't just, they're gonna put the money in their pocket, forget about it. They may take money similar to when we take money from utilities instead of having them bill and overlay a road. We're gonna do that, but it doesn't mean the work's not getting done.
And I may have said that kind of the wrong way, but ultimately it would get done. It's just whether or not they do that repair, or if, like I said, they may just plan on upsizing that line altogether as part of a larger trunk line system. So they may not do that specific repair, which is why they're not worried about coming back to the municipality for, you know, any other defects that they find along the way. And as Keith mentioned, that is just an administrative step just to say, we're interested in continuing this discussion. Ultimately, there would be the 7 agreements that would be signed, and within those great agreements would be that post-closing agreement for each point of connection that would have a cost tied to it. So before signing off on that agreement, that cost could be discussed. So it's not locking you into any cost associated with any of those repairs.
Financial commitment with the resolutions.
Okay, thank you.
But Steve, we ultimately, I mean, we think this is a significant savings because there's, anytime you work on these trunk lines, it's much more expensive. You have to pump around. You have to do a lot of other things that are not normal with like 8-inch lines. They're not easily lined. So when we heard about this opportunity, we thought it was a great thing for the municipality to take advantage of. Alcoasand, the benefit Alcoasand gets out of this is the regulators are on their case to do some sort of regionalization. This, when they can get somebody like a Mount Lebanon to come into the system, I think that's like a good mark for them. So they're kind of incentivizing us to move in this direction. And, you know, we've only had problems where we're dealing with other municipalities on other source. So I think getting our trunk lines, and so we don't have to fight with Scott Township about it anymore, up for St. Clair, or whatever. This is a good thing to go away. It's my 10 cents.
Yeah, that's the whole, I mean, when.
But I wanted to hear.
She actually got 20 cents.
Yeah, so when this started, I mean, each municipality had to estimate what they had to do with their system to do their lines. And that's when this issue came up, is what you do when you share a line with a couple other municipalities and it needs upside. You know, in some cases, there were agreements from the 1920s that weren't written very well, but were there. You know, you're talking a project that costs $5 million to upsize a line. 3 municipalities are supposed to come up with a formula to share that cost. The realization was that was not going to get done easily. And a solution was to have one body take it over, and not the opposite.
The only other question I had, and I can think this is more of an issue on the storm side rather than the sanitary, so maybe it's not a big issue here, but when they do eventually take all this over, like what's the timing of this, right? Like I can just see us, like Phil, you're saying if there's a major repair that needs to be done, that's their responsibility. And that's one thing, like legally, the other is actually getting them to do it. Like normally, if we have a problem, we call Gateway, there's a plan in place, and then something gets fixed pretty quickly. Do we have any experience with, you know, working with Alcoasand controlled lines in other municipalities, or is there anything that would lead us to believe that the response is gonna be so slow that it might be problematic.
No, they're in somewhere in the municipality, they have crews on standby, they have they have much more resources than you would believe. They're actually amping up for this. Most of the time, if your trunk lines go down, it's a pollution push into the creek. And that's problematic for everybody, so there's gotta be an immediate response, so they have like immediate response team, because that becomes a much bigger environmental issue.
Okay, got it.
And that is one of the main questions that has come up along the way, like, Augustine had recently, performed a presentation at the Three Rivers Wet Weather meeting. I came up there, and they said exactly that, what Dan was saying, that, they are making a push to make sure that they're on the ready, and then would have that same kind of coordination with the municipalities too, so that, you know, when something did come up, municipality will be able to reach out.
Yeah.
They'd be able to take action if there were any kind of backup or any kind of issue within the system.
Fortunately, we don't have many residents that are tied to trunk lines.
Right.
Most of our residents are tied to the lateral lines. So, I mean, I wouldn't say there aren't any, but
Yeah, that was my next question, right? So if all they're dealing with are the trunk lines, we run into situations, we even have one now, right? Where one resident is saying that there was a backup, it was caused by the municipality saying no, it wasn't, the insurance company's involved, so like, what's the potential for that to happen here?
we don't have people tied into the trunk line for the most part. There might be one or two here and there. But most of those people probably either pump in or they have a backflow preventer. So the chances of them having an issue is not that significant.
That's one of the reasons why they were looking for the 10-inch and greater, because typically once you're getting to that size, there's fewer direct tap connections.
And if there is problems, like you're saying, it'll be a major problem and they'll have to deal with it, right? Got it, okay.
And they're held by the same regulations, if even potentially higher standards than a number of the municipalities are.
Thank you.
And the one item, as you stated, regarding like the timing even of what that's good state. Initially, they were saying it could take up to 12 months, depending on how long it takes for the permit to be transferred. So they have to work through a DEP permit transfer as part of the process. They stated recently that they've been seeing some of that happen, potentially even quicker, 3 to 4 months. But again, that would be based on final approval of that agreement. They just need to get the ball rolling on starting to research some of that data before they can proceed. And that again is kind of what that resolution does. It allows them to begin that process of coordinating with DEP for that permit transfer. Here, this was just a little handout that they had in regards to roles and responsibilities throughout the process. Essentially, it all started with and the elected officials that you see there in the middle. Sorry, that's a little too small to see on the screen there. But essentially, it does just say to work with the manager to pass the resolution so that they can begin.
Thank you.
And with that, like I said, there are some other pieces. We're working through the easements. Bill had mentioned there are the agreements that currently exist and making sure that those are incorporated, and Alcosan would work through that. And that is, again, the reason why they've been pushed to do this by the regulators, and why it's a benefit across the region is so that there's not as much, finger pointing between municipalities that then Alcosan would own right up to the edge of each municipality is the idea. Before we move on to grow, was there any other questions regarding regionalization?
You got 1 minute, Dennis.
You'll see it.
You got 5 minutes to go through all of
The
the.
resolution will be on
Maybe
the June 13th
Okay,
for approval by the commission to start the process.
that's our decision. I don't hear any objections.
Decision time, but we'll talk about it when we get closer. You got 4 minutes to go through the.
Oh, I thought it was 7:30.
I realize it's 8 midnight.
Yeah,
We're gonna give them, they're just gonna give them the hook ourselves.
I could get through Grove
They
very
just want to get their teeth in the meat.
Yeah, okay, so again, GROW is the program that Alcosan established. using the funds from the municipalities, but ultimately to set up a grant program specifically for removing additional flow from within the system. And with that, Mount Lebanon has been very successful with these grants over the years. Typically, we utilize them to manhole line the system. With that, there is a letter of intent process that needed to go through. There were 2 proposed grow grants that were submitted with that letter of intent process. They were both accepted to submit in June. And with that, resolutions would be required. That would be something where those resolutions would be anticipated in June as well. And then there are some other repairs that are actually in the process right now of manhole lining that would be considered for next year as part of a reimbursement grant. The reason that we are waiting to submit those as reimbursement is oftentimes Alcosan can increase the percentage of grant if you're able to show that you're able to remove more flow from the system. And those are repairs that are already proposed as of right now anyway.
Is that why in both these examples, the municipal match kind of a wide range? Is that what you're referring to, is depending on which it's approved?
Right, and so they give that wide range of anywhere between 15% and 85% in terms of what the grant amount and ultimately your match amount could be. Typically, with what we've seen with these primarily manhole lining projects is somewhere in the 15 to 25% in terms of grant amount, which these are ones that in both of these cases, they're in systems that are over the gold line standard required by our consent order to complete already and have been identified by previous projects. I'll spare you some of the details, but essentially about this first one in the Hope Hollow area where we are currently well over the gold line standard. We're at 5,050, and that's just because of the denseness of that area. We would propose about 6,000 lineal feet of lining, 26 manholes. Another photo showing the region and the proposed lining areas extents. And then ultimately, in just preliminary calculations, at the very least, a 5% removal. But with the manhole repairs, we're expecting that to be somewhere right around the 10% I&I removal that be required by the order. And then the total project is estimated around 800,000 with that wide range of the costs. The other area is in Little Sawmill Run. That one, as of right now, is a larger lining project, about 9,400 lineal feet of lining with approximately 50 man rehabilitated within that. Map showing the previous study that had been completed to identify areas to be considered. And then that would get us right around to that 9%, or once we complete our final calculations, we would hope to reach that 10% removal that's required by the order.
Commissioner, have any questions?
Dennis, so following that trunk transfer.
Portions of it are.
Ordinance.
Yeah.
So we're still required to comply with the consent order,
Right.
even though it
Understand,
would be transferring. So those are lateral lines up the lateral part.
but there is a portion of that that's part of the transfer.
Yes, there are a few different portions actually that would be covered with transfer.
And I think both these projects are already, we would do anyway, right? Dennis recommended.
Yeah,
For our
exactly.
gold line standard. So they're good projects because we could potentially get grant money to comply with the order.
Meeting the gold line standard, and then
Right.
Lebanon has been pushing towards,
So there's
essentially manhole to manhole lining as much of the system as we can to get the 70 to 100-year-old system up to date.
projects you would recommend anyway to bring us in compliance with consent order requirements. This is just an opportunity to get some funds to offset the costs.
Right, and we're a little bit ahead of schedule still in identifying some of these, so trying to take that bite of the apple before everybody else is kind of chomping at it.
All right, any other questions? So we are behind schedule. But thank you, we appreciate it, Dennis.
Unsurprising.
Ouch. As we continue Gateway Engineering Night, next is Cedar Boulevard, Salem, Holy Crest intersection, and Mike Haberman is joining us.
You will also see resolutions on the next agenda related to those programs.
Take me out of the meeting when I have my. So I guess I can start talking before I share the screen. We're back to talk about some additional evaluation of Cedar Boulevard, Salem, Holy Crest intersection, as well as I'll call it the rest of Cedar Boulevard between the tennis courts complex.
And Mike, this is a continuation of a conversation we had before, right? You have some of the previous diagrams that you presented with us.
Yes,
looks
so
like
I
this here,
included the previous stuff
Right.
that we talked about last time,
And the new stuff. Okay.
and then added some supplemental stuff to that. All right, I'm on.
If you don't mind letting me know when you get through, like, if it's a new recommendation or the prior one, just because I see some of them, I'm not sure.
Sure.
what one was for. As you're going through. just-
Yeah, so I'll just run through the kind of the 5 bullet point additional analyses that we looked at in addition to what we had talked about last time. One was installation of low-cost modifications in the short term, installation of a mid-block crossing on Cedar Boulevard near the tennis center, and then installation of a raised crosswalk on the northbound approach to the Salem intersection, which is the marked crossing on Cedar Boulevard. And then evaluation of a sidewalk on the Cedar Boulevard side opposite the tennis center. That's where the asphalt parking area currently exists. And then some research on the effectiveness of those flashing beacons, the rapid flashing beacons like the ones that are out here on Washington Road across from at the elementary school. So the first few exhibits that are in here, and maybe I'll just jump to the exhibits, that way I can talk through each one of those. The first few exhibits were the same as last time, so this is just the existing conditions. We did add some, there was some question about, where inlets and storm sewers and sanitary sewers are, so we did pull in that information from GIS, but essentially it's still just the existing conditions. And then if you remember the potential improvements built upon each other, this first one is showing, the narrowing of Cedar Boulevard with the curb lines to minimize the length of the crossing. And then to bring the Holy Crest approach up at more of a 90-degree angle and just define things a little bit more. This would be superimposing the new markings on that scenario with the new curb, with the curb bump outs. And then the final kind of build on top of it would be to install those RFBs, which are the push button powered rapid flashing lights that would be actuated when a pedestrian is going to cross Cedar Boulevard at that intersection. So that was all,
This is what we talked about last time,
all the stuff we talked about last time.
and we liked it, and we're like, let's see more.
Yeah,
We
what
want
about
more.
this? What about that? So we're gonna talk about it a little bit. So just to touch on the first one is the next exhibit is there something that can be done in the short term that I'll call it temporary, but it could be permanent, but would require maintenance over time. To essentially create that same situation without the massive infrastructure and
Something
Yeah,
cheaper and
that's-
faster, that we
Yeah.
can do like, soon.
Exactly. So essentially, this exhibit, all it's showing is creating that exact same, the bump out areas where you already can't park. Getting the 90-degree angle on Holy Crest, some of the enhanced pavement markings leading up to the intersection with the legends on the road. The tracers through the middle of the intersection, yield lines at the crosswalk. So it's all pavement markings,
So it's all lines,
all pavement.
no
markings.
moving concrete,
Correct.
no
Nope.
curb cuts, no.
And no physical barriers. It's all visual pavement marking barriers.
But I thought you said it also included maybe some physical bump outs.
That was the
This one,
other one.
That was the first one. This is doing the same thing simply through pavement markings.
The temporary one,
Right.
this is just like a stop
Yeah,
gate.
So I saw the hash marks, I thought.
Yeah.
that was physical.
The question was, can we do something in the short term that isn't a significant infrastructure project that's gonna require all the design and permitting and bidding and things like that. So it was essentially creating some of these pavement marking enhancements and awareness at the intersection with pavement marking, without the new curb lines, without changing stormwater and inlets.
Paint some
and
lines.
Everything else associated with it.
And
So,
and what are we talking when we say like paint some lines, cheap and dirty? How?
so it wouldn't necessarily be cheap and dirty. We'd have to eradicate everything that's out there.
Okay,
And then put all new, thermoplastic would be best, because it's gonna last longer, it's gonna be a little bit, more visual.
but
Won't need
it's
as much.
temporary.
Yeah, it's permanent, but it just would need, every few years would need repainted or reapplied as it faded or as it, as it wore away. So this could be in any combination of these things. The legends coming up to the intersection we talked about last time, so it's it's the word slow that's on each approach on Cedar Boulevard with the plus intersection symbols. That's a treatment that PennDOT, a low-cost treatment that they came up with a number of years ago that they've been applying at, I don't want to call them unsafe intersections, but maybe higher crash frequency type intersections, just to raise awareness of motorists approaching an intersection. They found it to be very useful and very effective. That's something that could be done relatively easily.
Mike,
So, Mike,
forgive
go
me
ahead.
for not, I didn't bring the notes from the previous
Yeah.
meeting as far as costs, so. You mentioned the low cost, short term modification with painting the lines, $20,000. And then and I had asked a question offline for commission about what the cost is for just the flashing light, that's 50,000. But I guess the clarification is for the cost of, say, the markings plus the physical narrowing act, plus putting in the flashing, the RFB. So what would that
let's
total
call it
number, is
this
that all in
version-
for
this version
50,000,
here?
or is that?
This version here that has the new
Yes.
curb lines, it has the physical changes, it has the pavement markings, and it has the RRFBs.
Yes.
So that's gonna be at least $250,000.
Oh,
So it'll be, because there's more than just curb line, so it's removing all of the asphalt, putting a new curb line, and then there's 2 or 3 inlets and pipe connections that would need to be added, made, modified. You still have all the pavement markings associated with it, you still have the RRFB, which is, $50,000 of that cost, so, you're $75,000 for the RFPs, all the pavement markings and signage. And then you still have the curbing infrastructure, the inlets, pipes, things like that, so it's, it's gonna encroach, it's gonna exceed $250,000 for this exhibit that you're seeing here.
what if taking the mixing and matching, taking your first exhibit, these aren't numbered, so I can't refer.
down at the bottom right corner,
Oh,
sorry.
right. Okay, I think,
Yeah.
if you take this number here plus the flashing lights, what would that total up to be?
70 to 75,000.
So this is 75,000 versus,
If you put the flashers in as well,
as opposed to everything being 250.
more than 250. Yeah, without really getting the survey and digging into the hard numbers, it's just given the scale and scope of the project, it's based on some of the other similar type projects we've done, it's gonna exceed that number.
Okay, so 75.
There are some challenges with putting the RRFB system in. With the existing curbing and everything else that's out there, because when you put a system like that in, it's push button activated, so it's going to, and it's also considered a traffic signal, even though it's not a signal, just because it's a powered system that requires a permit from PennDOT. And then by virtue of putting that in there, there potentially going to be some ADA upgrades as well, because the reach to the push button, the ADA ramps, everything else associated with that signal permit has to be up to current PennDOT standard. So there might be some more, it's not as easy as just putting the poles in and the push buttons and the flashers under existing conditions. There might be a little bit more work associated with it. But it does kick it into the PennDOT process, even though it's not a state road, because it's considered a signal permit.
On the chart, I see you've got the new pavement markings overlaid on what I'm assuming
the gray on the bottom is also the old pavement markings.
Yeah, anything that's gray is existing,
Right.
anything that's bold would be changed.
The only question I have is, and I mentioned this last time too about the parking there. I know we're not changing the width of the approach. But, and I just pulled it up again just to double check and confirm, but there are cars parking sometimes in the yellow, sometimes out of the yellow, but just beyond where the,
Oh, on Holly Crest.
yeah,
Yeah.
the right turn only sign is. I'm just worried that, you know, like right now, cars will cheat that intersection, right? Trying to make that right turn because it's easy for them to do, which, you know, neither here nor there, but it does give them a little extra stacking room. When we cut this back and put that on the 90, we're basically cutting back by a length, maybe 2 lengths of a car, the stacking room. And it's gonna butt up against where people are realistically parking. So we would either need to put no parking signs there in addition to the yellow that's currently there, or do some additional striping to make it clear that people shouldn't park there, because if we make that, I mean, the left turn lane is there now too, right? But I'm just worried that with people parking on the right side, and if we have any cars stacking on the left, waiting to make that left turn, that it may prevent people from getting into that right lane.
Yeah, that, if we were to put a formal plan together, we could make an adjustment to where, you know, the formal no parking sign is on Holly Crest, some of those other little adjustments. So that was the initial kind of, what can we do in the short term, and if there's something we'll talk about short term. Second question that came up is what would it look like, or where would a mid-block crossing be on Cedar Boulevard? Share this. This is what you have the sidewalk network within the tennis complex that comes up here. Obviously, it peels off to these courts, it goes to the north of those tennis courts, it comes up into the back to some of the other courts that are up here. So the location, that exhibit that we have in there shows is where this sidewalk peels away from the existing sidewalk. If I were to drop myself in,
I'm
Go ahead.
interrupt you for a second.
Sorry.
No, I just, it's like,
It's okay.
sorry, okay.
You show me something, we'll stop talking.
if I pull up your street view. This was put in presumably by the municipality. So this is the location we're talking about where, you know, there was asphalt put in here, probably because, you know, the folks who were parking over on the asphalt parking lane were making their way to here because this connection, you know, provided to all the different courts, tennis courts within the complex. So that is where the exhibit that you're seeing showing the mid-block crossing would be. Share that back again.
And you have 2 proposals for that, one of which is
Yeah, there's two
it's a
options.
grade of 3,500, if it's raised, it's 20,000, am I reading that right?
Yeah, so it's essentially it would be an enhanced speed hump, but it's a speed table that's a crosswalk on it. So you would have the same ramps you have up at a speed hump, but instead of just being a parabola, it ramps up and then it has the plateau that's marked for the crosswalk.
So with crosswalk and speed hump, you guys did 2 for on that one.
Correct. So this is the exact same exhibit. It would have the signs for the pedestrian crossing. We would want to restrict parking.
Yeah.
You don't want 50 feet on each side of it, just so that you have the visual if you're a car and if you're a pedestrian. and you're gonna cross
That's my
there.
only concern,
Safe
the
only.
visibility crossing
Yeah.
between parked cars, and on both
Yeah.
sides, you'd have to restrict parking.
Yeah, so that's essentially.
Or at least 50 feet.
Yeah, that's essentially what we're doing there.
You lose how many spaces?
You'd lose 2 on each side, so 4.
What's the cost for a signalized intersection?
The last estimate we had when we were talking about that was about 350,000.
350,000.
Cheap, same price as 250.
Right, 350 for signalized kind of solves all these
Don't
issues.
forget, PennDOT you have to go through the process to have PennDOT do an analysis
Right,
and say that you can do a signalized
And
intersection.
how much does that cost? An engineering
Nothing.
piece,
yeah,
okay.
that's
That's a request.
So-
Yeah, so we can
PennDOT.
request and then see if we want to
When
do.
we did the initial data collection and analysis at this intersection, we evaluated those signal warrants and the thresholds are not met. So when,
The pedestrian thresholds are not met? or
no,
is it-
the traffic signal warrant thresholds are not met. So in the Commonwealth,
That's a-
you
Don't,
can't,
yeah, don't we have something in, don't we have something that says if the police deem that it's not a safe intersection, we can put traffic measures in place or no?
It depends on what measures you want to put in. I
Mhm.
mean, like you said, signals have certain warrants, stop
Mhm.
signs have warrants,
Mhm.
yields warrants. You
So there's-
just want to say slow, that
there are a series of traffic signal warrants, one of which has to be met in order to justify putting a traffic.
Right, it's not a subjective thing.
Correct, it's hard numbers. So if you mention unsafe, so there is a warrant, a crash history warrant for warranting a signal. That warrant, in the eyes of the METCD and PennDOT, is 5 or more reportable crashes that would have been corrected had there been a signal in over a 12-month period, a continuous 12-month period. Well, you know, crash analysis, and this one, I mean, while there have been some crashes over an 11-year period, there were 9. So this is, there would have to be 5 essentially angle type T-bone crashes over a 12-month period that were reportable injuries, tow, that to meet that warrant. So that warrant's not satisfied. The
So
volume-
they're basically saying, so we, and I agree with Mindy here, the desire is to say, we have a potentially, or what may be an intersection where we know there's been at least a few crashes and we're trying to mitigate that however possible, but that may not rise to the level at which the DOT says
Correct.
you need a signal.
Yeah, another, because again, part of any crash history is looking at why the crash occurred. You have 3 rear ends because somebody was on their phone.
Right.
There's nothing you can.
The signal's not gonna change that, right? Yeah.
And then the volume thresholds aren't met. There's a 1-hour threshold, there's 4-hour threshold, there's 8-hour threshold. None of
Car,
those.
right?
It's
Car and pet?
it's everything.
Okay,
It's everything, every approach, every pedestrian, everything.
okay. You didn't get that pedestrian.
So you guys are talking about it. Signalized intersection right there.
No, at
No.
the intersection, at the
We're back in.
250 intersection,
Yeah.
at the problem.
What is going
No, we
on?
don't care about
I care about that. I
that.
like that.
No, it doesn't.
Well, if I got anybody's second, I.
No one's
proposal,
getting
but-
hit there. People are getting hit at the other
Well, I'm
one.
saying
Well,
You're-
I'm not saying it's an either or proposal. I'm just
Yeah.
saying we see an awful lot of people crossing there. We have complaints about the speed on Cedar Boulevard. So to me, the idea of saying we could make it a speed hump and let's face it, we've got all that parking on the other side there.
Right,
You know, to try and use it as, you know, traffic calming. So again, what I would propose is to do something in both places. Rather than it being an either or solution.
But last time we chatted too, didn't you say that just the fact of having that crosswalk there actually increases the likelihood of an accident?
It's not that,
mid-blocks.
it's not that it increases it. What the studies have shown is that a marked crosswalk can give the pedestrian a false sense of security, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Does that?
It doesn't mean that it doesn't make like like out here on Washington Road, at the elementary school. That by all means is an absolutely necessary mid-block crossing. It makes sense where it is. It's been enhanced with a lot of the stuff we're talking about here, with the signage and the pavement marking and everything else. So the idea is if you are gonna encourage people to cross a particular location, and you want to make sure you mark it and sign it so that motorists and everybody else that's using the system is aware of it as they approach it and as they go through it, as opposed to coming upon it and not really being sure what's happening. So really, all this stuff is just meant to enhance awareness for the pedestrian and for a motorist, whatever option, if any option is pursued.
I only like the mid-block if it's raised. I think right there, not raised mid-block. It's just.
Yeah, I think it has to be
ridiculous.
raised.
Yeah,
The benefit we have in Washington is there's no parking there normally, not on the Washington side, I mean, the school side or. on the
I
business
thought,
side.
well, the
Close.
space had to be eliminated when that went in.
Oh. So there was, but now there
But
is.
now-
We may have taken one out just from a sight line standpoint.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And then jump ahead. So that's again,
What's that idea?
crossing, and then that's just showing the pavement markings and the ramp ups that would be associated with the raised crossing. Then the last thing that we looked at was What about sidewalks on the other side, of Cedar Boulevard? So as you know, there's got the rolled concrete curves on that side and then asphalt that was installed. I don't know when or what the history of that was, but obviously for a need for parking for the tennis complex. And it's used as such. It's pretty varying in width, so the actual curb width, the rolled curb is 2 feet wide. And then the asphalt area, it's a little bit varying, but on average, if you take the bottom of that rolled curb to the back of the asphalt, it's about 13 feet before you have the embankment behind it. So essentially what we're showing on here is that in that same width, from the back of that asphalt parking area to the other side of the road, you could put sidewalk along that entire side that's curved off with formal 7-foot wide parking lane, just like you have on the other side of the road, just like you have along Washington Road, and create that full sidewalk connection from Greenhurst all the way up to Salem, and have it run essentially along that entire length with a parking lane that would be at grade with the roadway, just like you have on the down by the ball fields, the new turf field down there from a couple of years ago. You have sidewalk, you have a formal parking lane next to the sidewalk, then you have the 2 lanes. So it would look similar to that on that side. So now you could have your cars doing their normal parallel parking along there as opposed to jumping up on the curb and fitting where they can, and you could have a sidewalk behind it. So that folks that do park on that side can then exit their vehicle like they normally would and then walk on the sidewalk up to either mid-block crossing or down to Greenhurst to the signal or up the Salem.
But that's $1 million.
What's that?
Or,
Yeah, so 750,000 to $1
it's $1
million.
million. So we want to
This
entertain
is
that
like
one?
long term if you wanted to.
Okay, yeah, I wasn't
Yeah.
seeing that, but I'm glad you priced it out and we're having this discussion. We asked, so thank you.
But again, it's just like everything else, the last exhibit kind of shows everything built together,
Okay,
if that makes sense.
yeah.
Kind of an ultimate.
So why doesn't Gateway recommend the raised crosswalk? Because that's only $20,000 at the intersection that we're worried about here.
So the issue with raised crosswalks are typical at mid-block locations, like what we talked about on the
Right.
tennis courts. When you get at an intersection, the ramps up are 6 to 10 feet long. And
Yeah.
you have anywhere from a 6 to 10 foot tabletop. So you have anywhere from a 24 to 30 foot long plateau or ramp up and plateau. So if this crosswalk stayed where it is, then your ramp up comes back into here where my hand is, which obviously doesn't work with Salem. So you end up having to shift this entire crosswalk down another 20 feet, almost so that it's out of the intersection in order to physically and geometrically get a raised crosswalk there. You move a crosswalk 20 feet from an intersection, now you're losing cars coming out of Salem and Hollycrest are losing their ability to negotiate people crossing, now you're pushing them further away, someone comes out of Hollycrest, then sees the person in the crosswalk, so it's not desirable. I do mention in there that there are raised intersections, that runs another whole litany of problems, drainage and things like that, but essentially, every one of these approaches would have that 10-foot ramp up, then the entire intersection would be raised, where you came back down when you exited on any of the 4 sides of the intersection, so, but that's a pretty significant, obviously a very significant infrastructure project as well, that traffic circle.
Yeah,
So based on the stuff we've seen so far, is there any
yeah.
strong feeling amongst the commission to do something? I mean, obviously, I've expressed my interest in one project, but that's not in the intersection itself. What do the folks feel about the intersection itself?
I like the $50,000 light a lot, that intersection, and I'm open to the 250, but I think that has to be a budget discussion. That's the big item.
And the 250 would include that light that you were talking about.
250 is on top of the light, right?
No, I thought that.
So that's
least.
With the light,
Yeah, that would be this one.
does that include the light, the 250 price?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so 200. Right, 250 for the light.
250 plus total project, is what you're saying.
I thought 250 includes the stripes, the light,
Pavement markings, the
pavement
the new
markings.
curb lines with the narrowed lanes and the landscaping and then the rapid flashing lights.
Right, so that all in for 250 is what I'm hearing for that.
I'm in favor of that, but I would want to make the decision about it at budget time when I see everything else.
And we do have that discussion, remember I mentioned with these other unassigned funds.
Or
we say-
unassigned funds, yes,
Yes, I think we can look at that
Well,
sooner when we get the list of
yes.
the various unassigned fund projects. You know, I'd like to put that raised mid-block crossing in that same.
Like the $20,000, or
Yep.
20,000.
Yeah, I mean, if, I don't mind having the cost of it and looking at it in the scope of all the budget, but like, just looking at where it is, and I was telling you, I'm down there every night except for when it rains and games are well, they're not canceled much on turf, but I was hoping that we could do something more significant mid-block to kind of ease the speed coming to that intersection, but it's a pretty good stretch, even after you hit that mid-block where that extra stretch of concrete is, it's more than enough room for people to get up speed again, which they do. By the time they get to that Salem Holly Crest intersection.
You think they'll
They're
accelerate
fine,
that quickly after they go up that speed? I hope they're gonna gun it that significantly.
I'll just say I go 25 miles an hour and people back up behind me.
Yeah, then we have-
Yeah.
But coming the
Yeah.
other
What
way,
I'm saying is,
Yeah.
to the point of, from this
Yeah.
section here.
Yeah.
Can you go to the drawing like that has that, just has everything, just.
I was hoping it wasn't as much room looking on the map, Steve, but it is a good amount of room.
So like the distance, show.
So this line up here matches the line down at the bottom, so it's.
Got a pretty good distance.
Yeah.
Mike, my other question, Mike, is how much do you actually think people would use a mid-block crosswalk there? Because if they're not parking proximate to that crosswalk, are they really like
still
to?
gonna-
They take way to walk
I
up
think
to
you
it.
have to turn it into a full-blown sidewalk on the other side. And make it real obvious where you need to cross, because I can tell you, people are crossing all over the place now.
That's why I'm asking the
Yeah.
question. I don't know if this would change that behavior
I agree with
without the sidewalk.
Yeah, I think you need that sidewalk to basically tell you when and where, and even, maybe even another light that would signal like you're crossing here.
That's a lot, I mean, that's a lot of money. It'd be cheaper to get the flashing light here and say, you know, $20,000 for raised whatever, and 50,000 for the flashing light rather than almost $1 million for a sidewalk.
I just don't think the cheaper version engenders the behavior change we're wanting.
Yeah, I think we would wanna get get a handle on how people were crossing now. My intuition is that
All over.
wherever somebody parks, they get out of their car and they cross. That's what I would think, because there's no sidewalk behind them and you're really not gonna walk.
Yeah.
You get out of your car, you'd have to walk up Cedar Boulevard in the lane of traffic to get to this location.
exactly.
At best, they're walking down.
Yeah, so you might
If
have,
they're close enough to the intersection.
you might have anybody who's 3 or 4 cars within here might be filtering to this spot, which is probably why the grass was all worn out and asphalt was put in, because they're filtering to that spot. But I think once you get outside of that 3 or 4 vehicles, they're just
Yeah.
starting to cross where they can.
Well, wait, so I guess my question is. For me, at the mid-block intersection is a challenge for this exact reason. I don't think it's gonna change behavior. I go back to how do we visually create the experience for people driving to say, this is an active pedestrian zone more broadly. If I paint that mid-block crosswalk, drivers are gonna say, you're not in the crosswalk. Right? Right. So by painting that, right, I'm actually incentivizing potentially bad behavior and just causing more problem. So how do I visually create the experience? I don't care. Paint fun paintings on the street, whatever, to create an experience down that whole stretch that says this is a active pedestrian zone, broadly speaking, knowing that I need a crosswalk on either end. But what I want to do is slow the experience down more broadly in that whole space. I don't know that that's a traffic, right, design. It might be something different than that. And I think that's where I say, are there other approaches to use in that space more generally that might not be, again, traffic engineering, but are in the spirit of designing a slower space. That said, I like this. I think this makes sense, and the whole package. Short of the mid-block crosswalk. I think the sidewalk on the other side makes sense. I think the parking on the other side makes sense this way. And I am happy to, say, we agree this is right. I don't know when we're going to fund it. It might be that we do some of it right in, available funds now. It might be that we do some in budget. It might be that, hey, you know what, it's gonna be 4 years. I don't know, but this is the approved design that we're going to be working toward over a course of time when funds are available and staff deem it's, we have capacity to do so.
The question though is to say at this almost $1 million for that sidewalk. And we're gonna have next meeting, June 13th, talking about sidewalks. And do we as a group say, if we're setting aside $1 million, we say that's where we want to spend it, or we put it in some sort of quote sidewalk fund or something or other, and put it somewhere else where we get more feet on the sidewalks, and that's where I go to, in limited funds, if I had to pick where.
Again, well, that's why I go back to, I'm not worried about exactly, some of this stuff, I'm not worried when it gets done. What I'm worried about is this is the design we agree is appropriate. And this is what we want staff working toward over a period of time. It might be that we don't do that sidewalk on that far side for the next 5 years, because it just doesn't raise to the priority, but we know it's on the list.
Put it in the capital improvement plan, is that what you're saying?
Essentially, right, again, again, this is $1 million. We're not gonna drop $1 million on this anytime soon. That's just a reality. I think we can all accept that. So how do we say, but this is the design we want? And there are priorities now that we might want to fund. But the sidewalk budget, right, where we do a sidewalk every year, at some point they go, yeah, okay, we've got a little extra capacity to do sidewalks. Let's go do that sidewalk over there because we now realize that really will make a lot of sense.
I mean, I'm curious just to go back and, I don't know who was around when the decision was made to put that there. I assume it's because the tennis bubbles are very highly trafficked and we want some parking there that's relatively convenient. I wonder was the conversation then like, where that later, or did it get to the point where we paid X amount for concrete and we don't want to do signals and,
I don't recall any discussion at all about sidewalk signals. It just, we need more parking for tennis.
see how it goes. If it becomes a problem, we'll deal with it.
We also used pervious asphalt. Was one of our first applications of pervious asphalt.
Interesting.
See, the only reason I bring this up is, right, so like the area where there's parking right now across from the bubbles is sloped, right? So it's not like that sidewalk it's not even a sidewalk. If the challenge we're trying to solve is parking, right? Like this parking is not handicap accessible parking. It's not people park across the street, get in their wheelchair and, frogger across the roads before they get hit. So I'm wondering if, like down where we have by the batting cages, we've got extra space. I don't know what that space looks like, but I wonder if we solve part of our parking problem by just extending that parking lot there. Building more parking there where there's currently grass.
I think we need more parking there, but that's a separate discussion. It'll get
I
eaten
know,
up
but
right away,
I'm wondering, the reason I bring that up is,
Some of that's owned by the property owners.
well, that was my question, but.
So some of that is their property.
But the other side of it is like, if we're trying to, one, maintain parking, two, keep this safe. Would it not be safer if we just got rid of parking on that side of the road altogether?
Yes.
People will park there no matter what. The reason that parking.
No, not if we get rid of that concrete.
It was dirt. It was just a dirt area. People will pull up on the side.
We have no parking signs there? I mean, if we put up no parking sign, I mean, that should take care of itself.
That's why it got paved.
How many spots is it roughly?
Probably 10 spots.
Yeah,
here.
that's what I thought. Okay.
It gets fairly well used.
It's very
Right.
used, yeah. I park there.
Well, let's do this because we're running out of time for.
If I could just throw out, all I would say is if you say it's just on a list for over the next 5 years, we're gonna look into this and whenever we can fund it. If we put a little bit more detail to this becomes very easy to just start applying. There's so many grants, MTF
Oh.
grants and school,
Now we're talking.
you're a recreation facility, you're a school, you're a walking district. I mean, there's so much money out there for that kind of system where it's not just for car capacity. That we can just start applying for monies, and these grants are usually good for 3 to 5 years. You can compile them, you can add them on top of
Say
each other.
walking to school routes?
Yes, I mean,
gotta
$1
get
million project, you might be able to get $750,000 in 3 or 4 different grants, and then,
Yeah.
put some capital of your own.
Which is why I go back to a certain extent, we just need to approve this is the design.
So what do we
want,
like?
Because that
Yeah.
creates capacity. Let's not chase it right away, right? Unless there's something
Well,
urgent.
I think there's something we should do in the short term too.
Yeah, I mean, right, Jay, one is, well, a couple things. One is, I think, applying for the grants, yeah, I think it's a proverbial no brainer. Two, is just more of my understanding your question, you were talking about what you supported. This leads to your question, but you were saying with the raised, not mid-block, but what raised crosswalk at the intersection. That's why I was just trying to, counting those is what.
All right,
So we're supporting
I
that.
support essentially this bottom design without the change that for an immediate action, right? The stuff that's on the bottom right, essentially what was proposed originally. If we want to do something right now, that's what I'm supporting, and supportive of doing. Is this intersection? Yeah, essentially the 250.
Oh, okay, that doesn't show the 250, that's the $20,000.
That's the 250.
That's the 250.
Flashing.
Well, they're squares.
250, including the signal, the light.
Yes, yes.
That's what
I want to focus on the intersection.
Yeah, that's a priority. That's where we're having peds get hit.
Yeah, but I would just back up the striping again on Holly Crest with the no parking.
Yeah.
Yeah, that.
I'm fine with that.
Yeah, there's a lot of fine detail.
Yeah.
This is just one area.
Yeah.
So,
And then on that same concept, I know this is just nitpicky, but like all of the crosswalks, they won't be angled into the intersection, right? They'll be separate ones. Like ADA compliant.
Oh, yeah.
Right, yeah, right now the picture just has them going.
Yeah, no, it'll be ADA.
Thanks.
so as far as direction for the staff, yes, we want to come back to talking about, unassigned funds, but clearly this seems to be pretty high up the list of something we want. So let's try and get that unassigned funds discussion for quickly on a future agenda so we get this project moving.
Yeah, right
But
after
we
we
just
talk
want
about
to put everything
sidewalks.
on assigned funds, so I don't know if that'll fit on the 13th, it'll have to be, in early July, but
Yes.
let's bring that back for us to talk about. We're short on time. Is there anything else on this subject right now? If not, I want to get to the next gateway thing on the list. Cool with this?
I think that's good to move forward. We'll hit it at unassigned funds and then maybe budget season if we don't get it through it and get stuff at unassigned funds. Okay,
All right.
that's
All right.
that's what residents are gonna want to know. When are we gonna do it?
Well, I back to look at discussion session, see when the unassigned fund meeting will occur. Don't have a date yet. We'll talk and figure out. We may have to move some stuff around for the priority.
We have a few things that are, I know we've already committed to the sidewalk discussion on the 13th.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we'll see if it fits in there. The second meeting in June, we're really gonna have to talk about the solid waste contract
Okay,
so that we get that information out. But we'll try to get the unassigned fund discussion, as Steve said. If it fits one of the meetings in June, okay. If not, we'll get it in the first meeting in July because we don't have a second meeting in July.
awesome. Even if we do it in 2 parts, if that's how we have to do it.
Put the Holly Crest thing
No,
on
it
for the
has to be.
sidewalk discussions. When we shoot that down, we'll be more inclined to go forward with the sidewalk stuff.
We're not shooting it down.
What? All right. Thank you, Mike. Appreciate it.
Thanks for the hard work.
Yes, thank you.
That's great.
Thank you. All right, last but not least, solar panels on the library. So who all is coming down for that?
That's me.
I see Robin's here.
Janice.
Talk about the library.
Yeah.
Oh. And how do I share?
What?
Just use my share screen?
Yeah, just use your share screen.
It asked me a question.
Just asking you what screen you want to share.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Yes. Okay, so we're just here to give the commission an overview of the PowerPoint or the library solar project. Thought it'd be good to bring a good project in front of the commission.
I love it.
Something that makes us feel good and actually went pretty well. So we call this little post-construction or post-project review meeting. This construction overview, the system's performance and any lessons learned that we had from the project. So, overview, we had a contractor out there, Infinity Inc. They were installing a 30 kilowatt system, which consisted of about 62 individual panels. Cost was $128,000. No change orders. Installation has occurred without issue. It just, the one final bit that's happening with the monitor. Somehow the software talking to the monitor, we're getting data from the system. We just can't display it yet, and they're trying to work that issue out. So we haven't finalized our contract until that issue is resolved.
Okay.
But we have all the data, so we haven't lost any data.
Oh, nice.
That's not voted. Going on those.
I like the solar panel.
Give us an presentation.
Yeah, it's on my screen and it says it's sharing, but it's not there.
Yeah, for some, your mouse isn't there.
Okay. There we go, okay. Sure. There. Just use the arrow keys. Okay. There you go. All right. So we already recapped the cost, need to final it out. Here's some pictures of the panels on the roof, actually 62 of them. They're anchored to our new roof that we put up there, just recently repaired the roof. So that one without issue, and we're not penetrating into this, they're just anchored up there and weighted down. This is the monitor that will be on display. It's actually there in the library. It's just waiting to get operated on. And then we actually get into the system production. This is the computer can display. So it can give you real-time information on the system. Gives you some performance. Actually, carbon reduction is noted on there. Kind of cool. It gives you the amount of energy produced in a day, and then it also sums it up for the month, whatever's there. And then what we're seeing out of the system is in the first 2 months, we've gotten 3.5 MK watts, or that's kilowatt hours. And then the second month is about 4. So the system is performing as we expected with 30 kilowatts. And if you look at the equivalent of what it's producing, it's not enough to power the whole library, but it is, it's performing like probably the equivalent of at least a couple houses that would power enough houses, a couple houses. So, and it is providing a benefit to the library, it's just not able to power the whole thing. The payback based upon this was still about 30 years. To pay it back, we knew that from the beginning, it wasn't going to be a payback on the system. It was more of a demonstration project. So it's operating as planned. The step to make sure the panels get cleaned. That's really the only thing you have to do with them. And a couple of things that we learned. And actually we thought we were gonna have a problem with Duquesne Light, then they came around and provided what they needed to provide to give us the proper connection back to their system. So the best thing that we learned was we really needed to do a little more due diligence related to the building's electrical service and how that interacts with the solar system and how it gets put back onto the grid when you're working with an older type of building that already has established service. But in the end, it worked. We got what we needed to, and it's functioning. That's it.
How do we do on the contract? Over, under, we hit estimates?
Yeah, there's no change orders.
So
Right as number.
Beautiful, thank you.
And when you mentioned the cleaning or the maintenance of the panels, is that something that's part of a contract? Or is that a separate, or are we gonna do that?
I think that's what we would have to contract for that.
Okay. I just wasn't sure if that was.
Yeah,
part of
we
the
didn't,
initial
remember, we didn't,
System purchase.
yeah, it was just, the contractors, we did the installation side that we would own them and maintain them as opposed to having somebody else own and maintain them over the years.
Okay. So this is a 30 kilowatt system.
Yes,
I have a 10 kilowatt system on my house.
so that makes sense. So about three houses.
Yeah, I generate about 80% of my electricity. With my 10 kilowatt system. Right now I just have gas things. I didn't pay a third of $120,000. I paid less than that. Any sense of why the price difference? I mean, I paid.
Probably did.
1.5.
Put it on a roof, put it on the roof of
3
the
years ago.
library. I don't know.
All right,
I mean, there's not a lot of data out there related to commercial installations, but I think that when we priced it, the actual bid came in less than we thought it would.
yeah,
But it's just, I'm not sure. That's a good question. Let's see if I can find that out.
yeah, I mean, obviously, that was, I don't know, 4 years ago, so. Solar's probably changed in price, but I would be curious,
Sure.
where is the differential there? Yeah, and, but it's great, it looks good. I use my app on my phone regularly to see how I'm doing, so hopefully, there's some interest in terms of, information on the app and the library. When it's up and running. I'll be curious to look at it and compare it with what I'm getting. I noticed on the pictures, those pictures were in shadow. Right, so depending on the height of the sun.
Sure.
That clearly will create some.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it performs.
Yeah.
When we get more daylight.
Yeah, well, and I think I'm glad you're taking lessons away from this one because we've got a nice big flat roof that's getting done right now. That seems like it would be even better location. To get, the economics to make sense.
They seem to be referring to the rec center.
Yes, I am.
I should bought a new house.
I mean, I look at this stuff like when they implemented the stormwater plan over a decade ago now, right? Like, yeah, so you look at that and go, wow, that really paid off.
Yeah.
And, maybe we only get a payoff on this in whatever, 25, 30 years, like you mentioned, but it's a step in the right direction. We talk about doing other things to offset energy costs and whatnot. We still need to do more with fleets and other things that, municipal buildings. So I think this is a good step.
Great. Yeah. What's the next one?
There's one other thing to mention regarding carbon and something that we hope to get in front of the municipality at a certain point, but there's a lot of money out there on paving, low carbon paving. Actually looking at more recyclable material, that's where they get the carbon credit. So you put more what they call RAP, which is recycled asphalt product in with the paving. It has oil and it has stone and it has everything else. And there's a lot of money out there to actually get grants for actually doing paving of roads. So that's something that we want to, yeah, it's something to consider given the size of the paving program that we put out every year and stuff like that. And there's
What's the
contractors being educated. Lindy's really pushing it. Lindy is the predominant material supplier in the area. So they're the ones pushing it. They own like 8 different asphalt plants in the area. So there's,
Is that part of like the Reggie stuff? Grants coming down from that?
yeah, it's coming from the federal level.
So what's the material again?
It's just normal asphalt.
Normal
but you
asphalt.
just put
Looks
in-
like normal asphalt.
But you put in more recycled products. You put more, you use
reusing.
more wrap instead of virgin material.
It has the
That's what-
same durability.
It does, yeah, but they need to get more of it down to prove that out. They've
Okay.
been messing with the design for a number of years, but they think they have it at this point ready to go, so.
What's the downside? Seems like
Right.
too good to be true, but what do we
So
just?
I don't know, we need to find out more about it. I was
Okay.
excited to hear about it. I just bring it up
Yeah.
because we're in the conversation about savings with.
I got Commissioner already drooling, so you.
I know.
I know you are, I can tell.
And I want to hear about the other asphalt that we were talking about, but I don't know if we have time, but pervious asphalt.
Oh, the pervious, I mean,
Yeah, that's been out there for a
pervious
while.
asphalt, it's been around for a while. The downside to it is it's more porous material. And you have to, when you put it down, it doesn't, it takes the water and allows the water to infiltrate as opposed to run off. So there's a certain portion of it that goes through the asphalt. The downside is that you have to keep the pores clean. You have to kind of incrementally sweep it up. I don't know that we've been doing that down there, but as much as maybe we should, but that's the idea. You can use pervious concrete also, but it's difficult in this region because we used to have snow and ice, but I guess we don't have it anymore. Maybe it's a better material to use now. But the concern was before, because it was more porous, that ice would build in it and pop it, and sort of it wasn't a great application in this particular area, but it seems to be gaining more popularity. I mean, you can do the same with brick pavers. They did them at the high school.
Yeah, the high school, and the high school actually changed out pervious concrete because they were having that issue
Right.
and went with a different pervious material.
Okay.
So a lot of this is,
In flux, but very interesting. We gotta put our boards on it.
I can see how the water gets you there, even if it just freezes, just water below freezing and cracks.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
But money for paving is good.
All right, any other questions for commission? Again, we want to hear more about low carbon paving once you know more. Anything else? Otherwise, we will, Dan, thank you. Boards and authorities, we've got about 2 minutes. Anybody got anything?
School board stuff.
Please.
Budget passed last night, increase of 1.2 mils on the tax side. Of a budget of, I don't have the exact number, but it's around 115.
Pension Advisory Board met, strong, continue to perform well, right, we are well funded, investment strategy is robust. Nothing really to report, they're doing a great job.
All right, okay, that's it. We're adjourned for discussion session.
That's great.